My name is Tricky Walsh. I'm an artist based in Tasmania in Australia, and usually I work between mediums, so I do painting and sculpture, installation. But for this show, I'm working on a painting which also has an aspect of augmented reality to it. I usually work within, I guess, kind of like a realm of science fiction or speculative fiction. So historically, I guess that medium for me in fiction has been something that has been able to affect change, whether technologically or the way that we behave around each other. When I began this work, I generally do a lot of research as well because I want this sort of level of authenticity to it. But I've been reading a book recently by Lisa Randall, and she's a particle physicist, and she's written this book, and it's all about, string theory, but also how we're kind of on the cusp of maybe being able to access other dimensions, which is really interesting for me. In China last year for Cosmopolis 1.5, I made a machine or a device that theoretically would be able to access the fourth dimension, which I was kind of assuming would be another space dimension. And it kind of also incorporated this idea of the observer principle, which is basically in science, whenever you observe something, you almost dictate its behavior just by sort of measuring it. So I was looking at sort of a more democratic way of maybe being able to do that by providing viewpoints from multiple people, and they'd have to sort of form a consensus to get to the reality of something. So it's kind of extended into this new work, Broken Symmetries, because I'm sort of looking at, I guess, morally what would happen if we were able to access this next dimension, and taking into consideration a lot of writing by authors who look at colonization and the way that we have historically treated each other, and embedding that within the work as kind of, I guess, like a, worst case scenario. Like, I don't want us to go where I'm suggesting that we might go, but I think it's kind of important, or some sort of moral responsibility, to provide a possibility that we can work against. So I guess the story behind it is kind of maybe a little dark, but the title, Broken Symmetries, also relates to this sort of physics concept where in any given system, if you make minor fluctuations to it, you can force it into a position of change. So, and I think that we're seeing that now, actually. So the optimism comes from, actually, it only takes small gestures to affect change, and that we're all possible. Like, we're all able to do that. There's the physicality of the layers. So there's paint on a wall, there are works on paper embedded into it, because I wanted it to have this kind of sense of like a lack of completion. So it's kind of a little bit like like a notice board or a mathematician working out an equation. It's kind of like incomplete in a sense, because I still want it to come to a different alternative ending. So it's one possibility, but then I'm hoping that it allows us to imagine other possibilities. But then physically there is also the augmented reality layer, which will physically, it's a strange position, but it will actually bring the work out and activate it in a way. So a lot of my paintings I see as kind of being mechanisms as well, or machines, or plans, or diagrams or something. So I'm really excited about that aspect, because I just feel like it actually does something to the work that I'm not able to do normally. But I guess theoretically there's a lot of layers as well. I tend to adopt a lot of theories from mathematicians or physics-based people, because they look at the world, but then I try to also bring it to a human realm, which I think we're lacking a little in our technological development. We're advancing, with great speed, but we're kind of still dragging around our sort of ethical system from ancient Greece, or a little bit later. So I'm trying to humanize all of the research that I've done, and just make this kind of, like a scenario. So we're looking at not only bringing out the imagery, but also bringing the threads of text out as well. So because some of the string theory things I was looking at, you know, we sort of have this theory that we live in a holographic universe maybe, so everything is actually two-dimensional, and how that shifts our perception of, you know, how we exist. Like light is the only thing that determines solidity in our world, really, because actually it's kind of just this shifting series of planes. So the technology that we're using is really interesting because it's almost repeating that kind of holographic sensibility by bringing out a physical thing into this kind of next dimensional level that doesn't really exist except through technology. So it's quite interesting that it has that double read of, you know, what is here physically, but then what exists in this sort of ephemeral plane. When I was invited into the shows, sort of, I guess, late last year, early beginning of this year, and, you know, I live in Tasmania, and at the beginning of the year, for 3 months, it was just burning on fire because of aspects of, you know, climate change, basically. It exists. Weird. But so I was just kind of living under these apocalyptic, stormy smoke clouds for months, and then the political system is where it's at now. And I don't know, I think that as an artist you have this kind of moral obligation to show the world aspects of itself by, like, you know, holding a mirror up to itself, and in that same sort of system of trying to force change is make people accountable for their actions, but at the same time offer them the agency in order to actually affect change. So I think it's sort of like a double barrel situation, that you want to empower people enough to be able to envision difference, but then also you need to sort of put them in a position where they do take responsibility for it as well.